As the procurement process went on, the former chairperson added to the specifications or description of requirements. Once in South Africa, according to the former chairperson, they specifically wanted someone with experience in election matters. MEC, therefore, in my view, were unsure of the exact specifics of what they were looking for. Accordingly, the failure of MEC to have a clear set description of requirements for the services they wanted was contrary to procurement procedures, and the ambiguity in the description created an uneven playing field, as one cannot state for sure what it is that MEC was looking for, and also why they failed to contact some more lawyers in Malawi than they did, since they were able to lower the specifications. Secondly, the investigation revealed that the former MEC chairperson started off by approaching 5 lawyers in the country between 9th and 20th February 2020. This therefore suggests that the method being used at this stage was restricted tendering under Section 37(3) of the PPDA. After they failed to get any lawyer from this pool of 5, that is when they approached Mboweni Mauleke attorneys in South Africa. No lawyer was approached in Zodiak or South Africa, but they just went straight to this legal firm after it was recommended to them by reliable sources of the former Attorney General, Honorable Kapare. Legally, they were now at this point using single sourcing method of procurement. Now, when one looks at the PPDA Act, single source method can only be used where only one supplier has the technical capability to provide goods or services, and also where there's emergency need for the goods or services. Under Section 2 of the Act, an emergency is defined as a situation which poses imminent threat to the physical safety of the population. During the investigation, the Director General and the Deputy Director General of the PPDA tried to stretch the meaning of emergency by arguing that what was happening with MEC at that time was an emergency because of the countrywide unrest. They further argued that they used the same method to justify procurement of goods during the fresh presidential elections of June 2020. If they had not done that, those fresh presidential elections would not have taken place. Now, it is a matter of general knowledge that the unrest that took place between May 2019 to around June 2020 were as a result of people agitating for fresh presidential elections. There were persistent demonstrations accompanied by loss of lives and elections, that is the fresh presidential elections, as an emergency. However, I'm starting to appreciate how time to appeal to the Supreme Court, seeking to overturn the decision of the Constitutional Court that ordered the said fresh presidential elections considered as an emergency, namely a situation which was posing an imminent threat to the population or damage to the property. It simply was not. Moreover, I find the argument by Counsel David Matumika Banda that MEC could not make an application to the court for extension of the dates of the impending appeal hearing because at that time the courts were simply dismissing all MEC's applications for lack of a better word, a bit insulting to the courts, as it creates an impression that the courts were just prejudiced against MEC at the time when it was MEC itself making legally unsound applications. All in all, it is my finding that the use of single sourcing method for the grounds upon which single sourcing method could be used were not met, and before obtaining approval from PPDA to use sourcing method was illegal. One of the allegations that Youth and Society raised was that the fees of $788,500 charged by the South African lawyers were unreasonable. At an exchange rate of 732 kwacha, 69 to $1, this translated to 581,673,000. According to the retainer agreement, this was to cover the merit consideration, advice, preparation, and prosecution of the appeal before the Supreme Court of Appeal. Both the MEC chair, both the former MEC chair and the former Attorney General Kapare informed me that this was the figure they negotiated with the lawyers, and that the rates that were used were South African rates. Malawi Law Society was not helpful in providing guidance on what would be reasonable and appropriate amount to charge in the circumstances. From my research of how the South African system, legal system works, I gathered that the rates for senior counsel range from 40,000 South African rands up to 80,000 South African rands a day for a 10-hour day's week. This translates to 4,000 to 8,000 rands in an hour. For junior lawyers, the range appears to be 2,000 to 3,000 an hour. That's South African rands. In terms of the hours that they were going to spend on this appeal, I considered the period between the day when the no objection was granted, as that would have been the period that legally the procurement would have come into effect, and as such, when they could have started working on the appeal, which was on 11th March 2020, and the date of the appeal, which was on 15th April 2020. They therefore had 34 days in between, including Saturdays and Sundays. Looking at the importance of this matter, I pegged the number of productive hours they could have been expected to work on this matter to be 15 hours a day and not the normal 8 to 10 hours. Accordingly, for the whole period between 11th of March 2020 to 15th of April, when the appeal was heard, each of them was going to work for 510 hours. This means that Senior Counsel Dumisa Bulens Tebeza should have been paid 4,080,000 rands, 245,000 US dollars. For Junior Counsel Elizabeth Mere, for the 510 hours, she ought to have been paid 2,040,000 rands, translating to 125,000 US dollars, 522,000 US dollars. Accordingly, the total amount, the reasonable amount that could have been expected to have been charged for both lawyers should have been 367,567 US dollars. Based on the above, and specifically considering that the rates I've used are the highest on the spectrum for South African lawyers at both the senior counsel level and the junior counsel level, I find that the fees that were negotiated by the Attorney General and the former MEC chair were unreasonable, even after considering the complexity of the matter. The charge agreed of 788,500 was more than half the reasonable amount that could have been considered. This was serious maladministration on the part of the two. I need to add, though, that our investigation established that this money was not paid to the South African lawyers following the court's decision not to admit them. Whilst Treasury had released 296,302,000 as initial 50% payment, part of the money was used by MEC to pay Churchill and Norris lawyers who were paid 110,675,000. Other payments made were to KP Transport, who were paid 3,564,125,000. 8,125,000 was transferred to the CEO account, leaving the balance of 165,650,000, which, according to MEC, was reclaimed by Treasury according to end-of-year procedures. When I inquired from the Accountant General, Mrs. Ginny Munyenyembe, she told me that she could only confirm that there was this balance in the MEC account after an audit by the National Audit Office is done, which she hoped to be completed by end of April 2021. However, this does not mean that the South African lawyers never used any public funds when they were in Malawi. During their period of stay in Malawi, they were accommodated at Piedmont Hotel Ombudsman. Much as the MEC CEO told the investigation that he does not know who settled their bill, was in credit. The hotel therefore deducted a total of 3,155,248 kwacha, which was the bill that the two South African lawyers incurred from 8th to 11th March 2020. If you recall very well, the Constitutional Court pronounced its judgment on the election case on 4th February 2020. MEC made a decision to appeal, and the efforts to get lawyers to represent MEC after disqualification of the Attorney General MEC a decision to appeal, and the efforts to get lawyers to represent it after the disqualification of the Attorney General proved futile. The evidence shows that on 1st March 2020, the former Attorney General Kaleka Nikapale and the former MEC Chair Justice Jenny Ansah, retired, went to South Africa to meet the Mboweni lawyers. They both informed me that when they went to South Africa and after they had settled for Mboweni Mauleke lawyers, they gave them a soft copy of the 93 Liver Act files, and they also made them sign the retainer agreement. The lawyers did not print the files in the 1 week that they had, and when they came to Malawi on 8th of March 2020 for admission, but also to prosecute the interlocutory application for stay, they gave them the remaining files in hard copies. However, evidence shows that it was only on 6th of March 2020 that MEC applied for no objection at PPDA. This shows that at the time the procurement process had begun, the South African lawyers had not only signed the retainer agreement, but they had also already started actual work under the agreement. By surrendering the soft copy of the Constitutional Court record before the procurement processes had begun, the former Attorney General Kaleka Nikapale and the former MEC Chair Justice Jenny Ansah clearly and reasonably discharged their function and mocked the procurement processes. This was serious maladministration. As stated above, the South African lawyers came to Malawi on 8th of March 2020. By this time, although the procurement process had begun, the no objection that MEC applied for had not yet been granted. The travel of these lawyers to South Africa was with full knowledge and facilitation of both the former MEC Chair and the former Attorney General. This was contrary to Section 49 of the Public Procurement and Disposal of Assets, which conditions the drawing of the contract and even its discharge to the granting of the no objection by the PPDA. Accordingly, the former Attorney General and the former MEC Chair acted illegally when they facilitated the coming in of the South African lawyers before the granting of no objection by PPDA. As an extension to all this, the Constitutional Court in its 4th February judgment had condemned the former Attorney General for acting on behalf of MEC and barred him from continuing to so act. One of the issues that the complainant, Youth and Society, had raised in this matter is basically that after the 4th February 2020 Constitutional Court judgment, the Attorney General should have basically stopped to do anything for MEC as regards this case, and should not even have been involved in the hiring of the South African lawyers. I am, however, of the view that after the Constitutional Court judgment of the 4th February 2020, Honorable Kaleka Nikapale remained the Attorney General of this country and accordingly the principal legal advisor to government. Accordingly, when his opinion was sought on the identification and suitability of the foreign lawyers, he was obliged to assist MEC. According to Chapter 15 of the Malawi Law Society Code of Ethics, the duties and obligations of a lawyer when he is seizing representation of the client demands that the lawyer does so in a manner that he does not leave a client stranded and unrepresented in the middle of a trial. To this end, the lawyer must endeavor to avoid prejudice to the client and must cooperate with successor counsel. His interaction with the South African lawyers, in my view, was necessary for him to hand over the matter to them properly. That said, there were still few facts which from the get-go made me uncomfortable and made me question whether the former Attorney General was playing an advisor role to MEC, or whether he was going over and above his role and was actually the one calling the shots. And that MEC, being the procurement and disposal entity, was just doing his bidding contrary to the spirit of the Constitutional Court judgment. The first one was the letter that he wrote to Ombudsman, that's the PM Hotel, informing them that there were delays in the finalization of the procurement protocols. As such, Ombudsman should allow the South African lawyers to check out and the bills should be sent either to his office or to MEC. As I expressed to the MEC officials during my interaction with them, this was purely an administrative issue which MEC should have handled and not the Attorney General. The second issue I was comfortable with was when Mboweni Mauleke was denied at the courts of Malawi, and MEC wrote the former Attorney General seeking guidance on costs and how to proceed with the matter, since the South African lawyers would not be able to take lead or take part at all in the appeal, and did not do the former Attorney General informed MEC that he had already handled the matter and had negotiated the fees downwards to half the amount that was agreed upon in the retainer agreement, as they had not done the full work. He did this all on his own prior to being consulted by MEC. It is therefore my finding that the former Attorney General, Honorable Kaleken Kapari, acted improperly, unconstitutionally, and contrary to the Constitutional Court's determination by involving with sorting out accommodation issues of the South African lawyers at Ombudsman, and also by going further the lawyers after their admission was denied. The procurement of the South African lawyers went through the MEC Internal Procurement and Disposal of Assets Committee. Legally, the IPDC, as it is called, are supposed to ensure that procurement and disposal entities procurement is in accordance with the laws and recognized good practices. Specifically, the committees are empowered to, inter alia, approve the method in each case. By the time the IPDC started looking at this procurement, the South African lawyers had already signed the retainer agreement and they had already started working on the case. According to the process at IPD was really just a matter of rubber stamping what the former Attorney General and the former MEC chair had already decided on. Their minutes, that is the minutes of the IPDC, dated 6 March 2020, show that there was no substantive deliberation or any issues raised with the submission by the IPDC. There were simple issues which MEC itself admitted to be problematic with the submission, like of they were being directed to treat the retainer agreement which had already been signed as a quotation. It is clear that the failure by the IPDC to do their job properly was not as a result of them having a laissez-faire attitude or lack of awareness of the law, but rather the fact that the former Attorney General and the MEC chair, both very senior officials, had already negotiated everything to the point of the other side signing the agreement, which fact eventually had the IPDC members' hands tied. It is therefore my finding that the pressure exerted by the MEC chairperson on the IPDC, to the extent that they failed to properly deliberate on this procurement and merely rubber-stamped the decisions that were made by them and the Attorney General, was improper. Thus far, it is clear that, but for the abuse of power by the Attorney General, by the former Attorney General, Mr. Kaleken Kapari, and the former MEC chairperson, Justice Chenansa, retired, the South African lawyers would not have come into Malawi. The two senior officials abused their power by engaging, having the retainer agreement signed, handing over the soft copy of the court record, and bringing in the South African lawyers before the procurement process had completed. They failed to negotiate reasonable fees with these lawyers, resulting in agreeing to a fee more than half of what was reasonable. This ultimately had a bulldoze effect on the internal MEC IPDC, whose hands got tired to properly deliberate on this procurement and simply rubber stamp what the Attorney General and MEC chair had already done. Moreover, the former Attorney General abused his powers and acted contrary to the spirit of the Constitutional Court judgment by engaging himself in the accommodation issues of South African lawyers at PMOT Hotel, and also negotiating downwards the fee to be paid to the South African lawyers after their application for admission to practice had failed and could not represent MEC in the appeal. I therefore direct that the former Attorney General and former MEC chair should refund in equal amounts 3,155,008 that was expended on the South African lawyers through accommodation, beverages, and meals at PMOT Hotel for the period the lawyers were in the country between 8th March and 11th March 2020. This money should be paid back to MEC, and proof of payment should be submitted to my office by 28th of May 2021. I am further directing that the MEC new commission, with advice from the current Attorney General, should bring the matter of the retainer agreement between MEC and Mboweni Mauleke lawyers to a logical conclusion. I need to say that during the investigation, we tried to touch base with Mbowen lawyers, but they never responded to any of our inquiries. So MEC should bring this matter to an end. It's still hanging by 30th of June 2021. During this investigation, I interacted with the Director General and Deputy Director General of the Public Procurement and Disposal of Assets Authority. It was very clear from this interaction that both of them could not state with certainty which procurement method was used in the procurement of these lawyers. At first, the Director General and his deputy strongly argued that the method that was used was single sourcing and stretched the meaning of emergency, which is one of the factors that justify a single sourcing method. I have already dismissed this justification of emergency in my analysis above. Secondly, they said this was restricted tendering method. When I asked them whether in restricted tendering you can lump together lawyers from within and outside the country, they could not respond. Later on, they simply stated that MEC would be in a better position to respond on which method of procurement was used. That the top two heads of public institutions with oversight powers over procurement in the country could not say with certainty method was the right thinking Malawian with interest in public procurement. Furthermore, in their letter dated 11th March 2020, granting the no objection to MEC to procure the South African lawyers, the PPDA Director General was clear that the no objection was based on the reliance of the professional judgment of MEC regarding suitability of the lawyers and also reasonableness of the fees. But then one wonders, what is the point of having an oversight procurement institution if they leave these decisions to the procurement entities like MEC? Obviously, this was their job, not MEC's, to ensure that the lawyers were suitable and the fees charged were reasonable. It is my finding, therefore, that in both these cases, there was serious failure of duty by the two heads of the PPDA. However, the misconduct of the PPDA, especially the Director General, did not stop there. Evidence shows that they received the request for no objection from MEC on 6th of March 2020. PPDA then convened an extraordinary meeting of the board on 9th March 2020. According to the DG, Mr. Housey, the normal process after receiving such a request is to assign it to a specific desk officer for review and analysis. Depending on the threshold, the technical report is then submitted to the board or the Director General. The Director General did not assign this request from MEC to the desk officer, stating that there was not enough time between the time of the submission and the date board meeting was set, as he was under too much pressure from MEC. He did not have a good answer when I asked him why he did not ask the chair to extend the time for the meeting to allow for the technical report to be prepared. It is clear that as Director General, he was simply not in control of these processes, but was just going by the whims and demands of MEC and the PPDA board. Considering the sensitivity and the amounts of money involved herein, no reasonable Director General of a procurement authority would have proceeded with the board meeting on this issue without the technical analysis of the submission to guide the discussions of the board. It is therefore my finding that there was failure of duty by the DG to request the board an extension for the date of the meeting for the preparation of the technical report on the request for procurement of the South African lawyers by MEC, and failure to impress on the board about the importance of such report. Further to this, when the PPDA board met to discuss the MEC submission for no objection on 9th March 2020, the minutes of the extraordinary meeting submitted to us by the Director General did not make any reference to the technical report. Neither did the Director General nor his deputy mention anything about the same. But the end of the minutes clearly showed that the approval by the board was to be subjected to the fulfillment of 3 conditions, although on the minutes only 2 conditions were indicated. But the numbering itself clearly indicated that some information had been removed or deliberately skipped. I then interacted with the technical team from PPDA, who confirmed to me that they did attend the board meeting and they were asked to come up with a technical report, which they did soon after the board meeting on the 9th of March 2020. I further went through the email trail of the board discussion after the meeting, where they were asked to provide the final approval for the no objection. And I noted that one board member by the name of Ms. Constance Mosopole requested for the technical report, which was not available during the meeting and was one of the conditions for the approval. Why the Director General decided to suppress the issue of technical report in the minutes is subject to a lot of speculation. However, that he did it and in such a crass manner is so disturbing and reflects badly on him as a public office. This was serious maladministration. Following from above, it is clear that the conduct of the Director General and his deputy in this matter left a lot to be desired. Most of the things they did and or omitted to do revealed high levels of incompetence. Being heads of a body that oversees procurement, to this very day, they cannot say with certainty what procurement method was used in the procurement of these lawyers, leaving that determination to Malawi Electoral Commission. They failed to advise the board appropriately about the importance of the technical report, and for lack of a better word, conveniently and crassly omitted mention of the technical report in the minutes. I therefore direct that the body of the public procurement and disposal of assets assess and decide on the suitability and competency of both the Director General and his deputy for this post. This should be done, and a report of the same should be furnished to my office by 28th May 2021. My investigation has further revealed some serious misconducts committed by the board chair of PPDA, Mr. Madaliso Meta. As stated above, at the time the extraordinary meeting of the board ended, there was no formal approval for no objection by the board members. There were 3 conditions that had to be met. Firstly, the issue of the technical report, as already explained above. Secondly, evidence that MEC had approached the local lawyers. Secondly, evidence that MEC had approached the local lawyers and failed to engage any of them, and also evidence of vetting by ACB. Under Section 3711 of the PPDA, any single source or high-value procurement, as this one, is subject to vetting by the ACB. Accordingly, the Anti-Corruption Bureau vetting is supposed to precede the granting of the approval of no objection. The evidence, especially the email trail between the board members after the 9th of March 2020 extraordinary board meeting, where they were discussing the final approval, show that the board chair, Mr. Madaliso Meta, wanted the grant of no objection, and that in this case, it had not yet been granted, still directed the Director General to proceed to issue the no objection, much to the displeasure again of Director Constance Mosopole, who raised the same issue without any response. The no objection was issued based on the board chair, Mr. Although at that time, the ACB no objection had not yet been received. It came later, and I think it was on the same day. It is my finding that the board chair of PPDA was so geared to proceed with the procurement of these South African lawyers because there was a personal interest in ensuring that these lawyers are procured to handle this appeal. The board chairperson, Mr. Meta, was one of the lawyers for Professor Peter Mutharika, the second respondent in the election case in the Constitutional Court. He argued for the second respondent in court during the hearing, and his name even appears on the column of the judgment of the Constitutional Court. If MEC was going to prevail in the appeal, then the second respondent's May 2019 election victory was going to be upheld. This was the exact reason Mr. Meta and his colleagues were in court, to uphold the victory of Professor Peter Mutharika. It is clear, therefore, that Mr. Meta found himself in a conflict of interest situation. His private interests conflicted with his public duties as chairperson of the board of PPDA, especially in this procurement of the South African lawyers. The best he ought to have done was to recuse himself from this meeting and let other board members deliberate and decide on the issue. At the very least, he ought to have declared his interest in this matter. He did none of that. Perhaps the grave misconduct by the board chairperson, Mr. Meta, that my investigation revealed has to do with his own illegal appointment to the board of PPDA. In the course of this investigation, an allegation that Mr. Meta had not been nominated by Malawi Law Society for membership to the PPDA board as required by the law came to my attention. I therefore invoked Section 126 of the Constitution to look into this matter. Under Section 7(1)(a) of the PPDA Act, the authority is supposed to consist of 5 members, one such member to be appointed by the Malawi Law Society. Evidence shows that Malawi Law Society nominated 2 names, Ms. Innocencia Otoba and Mr. John Susbanda. As per the law, these 2 names, including the others from other professional bodies, were forwarded to Minister of Finance. Public Procurement and Disposal of Assets Authority later received 5 names from the Minister of Finance, and one of them being Mr. John Susbanda. The PPDA then submitted these names to the National Assembly on the 8th of May 2018 for confirmation hearings as required by the law. And again, Mr. John Susbanda was one of those who was submitted to National Assembly. The evidence shows that Public Appointments Committee of Parliament scheduled the confirmation hearings for the PPDA board nominees, and this notice of hearing was copied to the Chief Secretary as per the practice. On 8th of August 2018, upon receipt of that notice, the Chief Secretary wrote to the Clerk of Parliament that government did not recognize those nominees invited for interviews, and that his office will write her on the appointment of the Board of Directors. On 2nd October 2018, the Chief Secretary submitted fresh lists of members of the PPD, which among other things replaced Mr. John Susbanda with Mr. Madaliso Meta. Mr. Meta was later confirmed by Public Appointments Committee. Despite that, a whistleblower raised the issue of illegal appointment of Mr. Meta, and that PAC tried to get to the root of the matter. Nothing came out of these efforts until the time I was conducting this investigation. When I inquired from Mr. Meta about the legality of his appointment, he simply told me that he was not privy to the appointment process. Suffice to say that he was invited to, and he did attend the confirmation hearing at Parliament. I did also inquire from Justice Muhara, who effectively justified this appointment by referring to Section 89 of the Constitution, which according to him gives power to the President to make such appointments. Section 89 states that the President shall have powers to make such appointments as may be necessary in accordance with powers conferred upon him or her by the Constitution or an Act of Parliament. In my considered view, this provision does not give a blank check to the President to make appointments anyhow. Such appointments must be in accordance with the Constitution or an Act of Parliament. Accordingly, an appointment by the President has to be specifically provided for in the Constitution or Act of Parliament. Some of the specific constitutional provisions giving appointment powers to the President are Section 98(3) on the appointment of the Attorney General and Section 101 on the appointment of the Director of Public Prosecutions. In as far as Acts of Parliament are concerned, Section 6A of the Corrupt Practices Act specifically gives President powers to appoint the Director General of the Anti-Corruption Bureau. The PPDA Act does not give powers to the President to appoint members of the authority, and therefore I do not see how it can be argued that based on Section 89, the President had overriding powers over what has clearly been outlined in an Act of Parliament. All in all, it is my finding that the former PPDA chair, Mr. Madaliso Meta, was illegally appointed on the PPDA board. He knew or ought to have known of his illegal appointment, but continued to sit on the board regardless. But his illegal appointment resulted in some illegal activities while serving on the board, and specifically when the board was considering the make submission on procurement of the South African lawyers. He bulldozed the board into granting the no objection even before the vetting from ACB was done as is required under the law. Moreover, he never recused himself nor declared his conflict of interest when the PPDA board was considering the submission for MEC on the procurement of South African lawyers, when he had a direct interest in the appeal case for which the lawyers were being recruited for. To ensure justice for all this, I direct that Mr. Meta should reinvest the people of Malawi through the PPDA the sum of 8,757,557, which is the amount that, according to the PPDA, was spent on Mr. Meta in terms of airtime, sitting allowances, T&T allowances, and conference and accommodation for the period that he illegally served on the PPDA board between November 2018 to June 2020. This should be done, and proof of the same should be furnished to my office by Mr. Meta and the PPDA by 28th of May 2021. As I have already found above, the former Chief Secretary, Justice Lloyd Muhala, played a big role in the illegal appointment of Mr. Meta as PPDA board member and chairperson. His explanation that he only facilitated the process is clearly not true, as evidence clearly shows that the OPC, under his leadership, hijacked the whole process and appointed members that OPC wanted, not those appointed in accordance with the law. This was done deliberately, intentionally, or out of sheer incompetence, all of which make his suitability as a judge of the High Court questionable. No one in this country is above the law. The law is crafted in such a manner so that it should provide checks and balances. It is imperative, therefore, that things are not read into the law when they are not provided for. To allow such would lead to abuse of power for individual gains, as it happened in this case. To this end, therefore, I direct that the Judicial Service Commission, in accordance with its powers under Section 118 of the Constitution, as read together with Section 119 of the Constitution, deliberate and determine on the suitability and competence of Justice Lloyd Muhala to hold the position of a judge of the High Court. The outcome of this process should be communicated to my office and Malawians by 28th of May 2021. So what I've just presented are major findings and directives in this report. The rest of the findings and directives are contained in the full report, which I encourage all of you to read. We have titled our report Upholding the Profession, and the cover itself, I have it, it's here. The cover itself is telling that the report has focused largely on the legal profession. The investigation has clearly shown how some very senior members of the legal profession behaved in the most unprofessional manner by totally disregarding clear provisions of the law. Whatever their motivation was for conducting themselves in the manner they did is a subject for speculation, but it is something that we must all frown upon as a country at any cost, so that we have a sense of order and justice in this country. What we have done in this investigation is to clearly condemn what they did, hold them to account for their actions or misactions, and provide remedies that show that as lawyers themselves, they are bound by the same law as everyone else. This is what it will take to uphold the dignity of the legal profession and the basis of our title. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Honorable Ombudsman, for that comprehensive report. Ladies and gentlemen, from the reading of the report, we can all appreciate that there are several institutions that were involved in this investigation, whether as respondents to the inquiry by the Ombudsman or as complainants to the investigation. Allow me now to invite Mr. Amos from Youth and Society, who came to the Office of the Ombudsman with a complaint of this nature, to give few remarks. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. That's the point of correction. My name is Amos Simoela, not Simoela. So, Honorable Ombudsman, on behalf of Youth and Society, and also on behalf of the youth in this country, we would like to commend your office and to thank you for acting on our complaint. We really appreciate that. We don't take that for granted. We at Youth and Society, and also the youth of this country, we really wanted the truth about this matter. happy. We are impressed, and I hope all Malawians of goodwill are happy. Clearly indicated. I won't say much as regards to our next steps or our actual stand on the report. We will have to sit down and read the report thoroughly, and then we'll come up with our stand and also our next step. Above all, we would like to commend your office, and we would like to encourage you to continue doing the good work that we are doing. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Amos Simewa. Again, from the presentation of the Honorable Ombudsman, we have a number of respondents that have been directed to act on specific recommendations or directions. One of them is Judicial Service Commission, which is here represented by Honorable Justice Rezin Zikamanda. May I invite Honorable Justice to give a few remarks.
Thank you very much, Honorable Ombudsman, and the entire membership gathered here. I think just to emphasize that I am here on representative capacity, representing the Honorable the Chief Justice, who is chair of the Judicial Service Commission. It is an honor and a privilege to be present and to listen to the erudite report that has come out, very, very comprehensive report. I think it was very thorough. Lots of work went into it. We are going to read the report as given. We take note of the different points that have been raised in the actual presentation right now. Together with what we'll read, we'll see the way forward. I will report back to the Honorable the Chief Justice on what has transpired at this function, and then